Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award-winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. Hey everyone, welcome back to Grief Uprooted. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for your questions, your comments. You are not only healing yourself, you are healing others. By showing up and sharing your story and being involved and clicking follow on Spotify and all our social media, we're growing our community. We're growing our community to heal grief. We're having those deep conversations, and I am so proud of you all. So today's topic, I've titled The Most Important Picture. I do want you to take a moment and check your readiness before you listen to the rest of this podcast. We're going to take a deep dive into when is the right time to take a photo. What if you've experienced a miscarriage and you have that ultrasound picture? What if your baby is stillborn? How do you take that picture? And what's the appropriate way so that you have some memories? At a funeral home, is it okay to bring out your camera and take a picture? I share with you one person's story and we explore all these questions. So just remember, this is one person's story and your story matters. You're more than welcome to come on Grief Uprooted and share your perception and your experiences with grief. I so appreciate you. Do click follow. Let's grow our community together. It is only together that we will heal. Welcome back to Grief Uprooted. Before we start today's episode, I know I love to throw questions out at you guys, but today's episode is about the most important picture. My guest, Jen Sulak, is from Dallas, Texas, and she has found a way to really help her heal. I'm not going to give you any more than that because I really want to bring you back down to what's the most important picture. So we think about a wedding, right? That's a huge thing. We got to get the picture, getting married one time in our life, hopefully. But then also the birth of our children. But then what if I was to say to you, what about that woman who went in and saw for the first time in an ultrasound her baby? But then they gave her a picture and said the little one is not going to survive. Or you're at the funeral of someone you love. Is it okay to take the picture? Should I take the picture? What if other people see me taking the picture? I know right now where your mind is going. Are you sick for taking the picture? I can hear all of those words right now. So today, let's tackle that. I do believe the most important picture is the picture you take of someone you love who has just died. Welcome, Jen. Hello, hello,
Hi.
hello. Hi.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Well, thank you for coming. And I know your biography is amazing. I just I just love the vibrance of you. I have to say that first. I know that you started like as a mom at home. You have a podcast for tattoos and toddlers and a range of guests from working individuals sharing their real life stories and the challenges we face on balancing all that. I can relate to that.
Yep.
16 years ago you started in photography or even longer and love the concept of weirdo weddings. I have a daughter who's getting married presently. And,
Aw.
but then I also heard a little bit about your grief story. So, years ago, when I first started in this career, they had a book and it was how to take a perfect or beautiful picture of your stillborn baby.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it was really interesting. It wasn't a hot seller, I'm going to tell you that.
Mm-mm.
And
No.
I also had the privilege of working with a gentleman who took beautiful portraits of his stillborn son and shared them with me. Um, and working with Hospital for Sick Kids here in Ontario, Canada, this is part of it, right? This is part of your palliative care package when you're working with perinatal or pregnant women. But, I'm just curious because I know you've reached out to Grief Uprooted, so there's got to be some grief in there. Uh, what would possibly bring you to want to explore this? And later on, we're going to get into how to take that good picture. And is it okay to take the pictures? So, kind of share your grief story. Like, what kind of brought you to where you are right now?
Yeah, this was a very fascinating journey for me, and I was just sharing it yesterday. We started trying to have a family around 2015-esque, and at this point we've been married for 12 years. We're very comfortable, being married with no kids. We had friends with no kids, and
Time to
and
get
we
it
decided,
on.
yeah, yeah, it's like we decided to start, a family. And for whatever reasons that at that time in my life that I had gotten pregnant and gone to a photography convention.
Mm,
And for it proceeded 2 years in a row, I was having a miscarriage at that photo convention twice in a row.
oh,
And at the time I was seeing a midwife, and she's like, well, once is maybe a fluke, twice is maybe you might want to get looked at. And I was like, okay, a whole bunch of things happening in my life at that time with, enjoying my business, but also trying to start a family. And I was just getting older and older. Like I'm in my, mid to late 30s now, trying to have a kid. And it wasn't until it was very powerful to share that this week, those two losses in particular, because it's almost been, I would say, 9 something years since the convention's been going for 10 years.
yeah.
And I was telling them, because a lot of these people were there with me
Hmm.
during this. It wasn't like I was at home lamenting on my own. I was in the middle of a big crowd. I was still photo shooting and making art with people while I knew I was bleeding out. Um, the first one, I didn't have an idea of what was going on. I didn't know what was normal or not because I'd never been pregnant before.
Yeah.
The second one, I was told before I went that, they did the scan. And this is where I wish I had the photos. This is where I had wished for these two first ones that I had had a photo of just a spot. Like I'm just to show that my uterus had something in it.
The reality,
And
right? To be able to
yeah,
say,
yeah.
this is real, right?
Yeah, because something's going on in your body, but that's kind of like there's that period of time when you're pregnant where you don't know anything of about what's going on. You know your body's changing, something's going on, but you can't see it for a really long time for some of us.
Yeah.
And so especially when it comes to the belly and the heartbeat and all that stuff. Well, the first two never made it to a heartbeat. So
Mm,
um if y'all can go with me for a second when I got pregnant for the third time
mhm.
and you hear the heartbeat for the first time,
Yeah.
like you've been working so hard over the last 2 years trying to figure out what's going on with your health, getting medicated for high blood pressure, whatever was going on in my body, I just had to roll with it. And then I hear the heartbeat of my child.
Mm.
I I think I kept every photo, every scan. At that point, I was like, these photos were something for me, a visual confirmation that this happened to me. And a lot of people don't understand when you have a loss because they're like, well, you don't have a baby, so it was like you were never pregnant. You never got the end result. And before all of this, to take you to that the place that it was called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, I had volunteered for them briefly quite
Mhm.
a few years ago. So I understood bereavement photography for children. And I understood going into the hospital to try to do photo sessions with babies that may live days, may live hours, may have already passed. And I was doing editing for them. So I understood the importance of the photo, but I did not fight for it for myself. I was like, because when it's a baby, it's one thing. When it's a spot on your uterus, you're like, well, you don't think about it as hard.
Yeah.
Or you don't think about it later, how it could have been a nice tool to heal with. So I was kind of sad about the first two not having any kind of memorabilia.
Yeah.
or a scan or an image or anything. And I very clearly remember seeing a little baby on one of them. I can't remember which one it is now, but I clearly saw development there, and I would have totally loved to have that little photo. It
Yeah.
would have been so cute.
After I heard, like, after you reached out and we had exchanged messages and stuff, I had my last baby at 40. And after I had her, I wanted another one to go with her because she was like 13 years down the line. And my career took me to deployment and things like that. So I had this big gap. And when I got pregnant, I was so excited. I got pregnant right away. I'd never experienced a miscarriage. And I was in a Sears. God knows if they're still around, but I don't think so. And I went to the washroom. And I just remember that experience of bleeding out and going, oh my goodness, like, what the heck is happening to me? And going, I can't, like, and I had that little picture. And, you know, it was it was life altering. And I never could get pregnant again after that. And I tried, but I just sat there thinking, I'm giving myself goosebumps. Like, I couldn't imagine it being my first. I couldn't, right? I just couldn't. Like,
Yeah.
I thought about the three that I had, and but to experience that for the first, and what my I want to say French, but I'm not going to say that. What a mind fuck, right? It
Yeah.
just really plays with your mind because you're like, I was pregnant. I know I was pregnant, right?
Yeah.
And then you lose the baby, and you're like, okay. And then you hear those things, right? I couldn't imagine being in a photography event and then going to the washroom and then still trying to promote your stuff, still trying to,
Still working. Yeah. And
like,
I really do think, and a lot of people are gonna think I'm weird about this, which is great because it's part of my story. I felt so wonderful being there with everybody, even though I was going through the most traumatic spot of my life. Twice in a row. Um, I wanted to let them know how thankful I was that I had an outlet to express myself, even if it was hard.
Mhm.
And then, what I was also going to say was for those that have not experienced a miscarriage, because I've had three now, they were all different. They
Yeah.
were all clearly different. And the second one, I was nearly finished at the convention and just started gushing for 7 hours straight.
Wow.
And I didn't feel like my health was in jeopardy, or I probably would have gone somewhere, but it was just keeping up with the fact that my body was working overtime to just work everything out. And the next morning, because I barely got any sleep because I was afraid to lay down because every time I laid down, it was all over the place. So I laid down for maybe an hour or two, and then my friend came over to create with me in the morning, and I was still very sore and, you know, whatever you want to call it in the abdomen area. So I would be walking around just very gently,
Mhm.
shooting with her. I got up the next morning and did a photo shoot. I mean, that's just she sat there and cried with me for a minute, and I said, it would just really make me happier if I could create with you
Yeah.
than worry about sitting here and feeling sorry for myself, is kind of how I felt at the time. And there's something about when you're traveling and you need to go to the airport the next day and you're like, am I going to make it? Am I going to make it on the plane? Am I going to have to go to the bathroom a lot? And
Yeah.
I don't know. The timing was so weirdly, morbidly perfect that I had a good trip home. But when you want to grieve with your spouse or your partner, you have to have a delayed moment with that. So I kind of grieved alone in a giant crowd, which makes sense. But then I also went home and grieved with him. Um, and then it was kind of funny because, and the reason why I mentioned that having two before having a baby is when you get pregnant the third time, for my story, is that you're obsessively watching everything at every moment. You're afraid to eat or drink anything. You're afraid to do a whole bunch of different things. Um, you don't know if you're going to stay pregnant or not because of the last two. Um, a friend of mine had no idea what I was going through, and she would just be like, I don't get it, but I sympathize. And I was like, well, it just so happens like not that long after I went through mine, she went through it too. And she says, now I get it. You're literally obsessively checking your underwear every single second you can. Every little fluid coming out of you, you're like, okay, I've got to go check. I'm laughing about it now because because I've healed from it, right? Like, but it's a very traumatic experience. I cannot underplay how traumatic it
All
was to be
all
pregnant.
yeah, and it's all consuming. Like, I have friends who went through this, and, you're just yeah, and I love you being so open and candid about it. You are. You're checking the toilet paper. You're checking everything because you're like, one bit of blood, could be the start. And you're not going to have sex. You're not going to put anything in there. You're going to make sure you don't take too hot of a bathtub. No hot tubs. Like you just
Everything.
everything, right? And you're like, I'm
No
so glad.
caffeine, no nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the time you're done, you're like, "I know my vagina. I know my vagina very, very well." Because
Yeah, and I
you
was so thankful that with the pregnancy, despite me obsessively checking everything, I was a really, really great pregnancy. My
yeah,
numbers were terrible. The doctors couldn't understand why I was like, the blood pressure is very frustrating because I've been fit most of my life. I am not supremely overweight or obese. I got my kidneys scanned because my dad has one kidney. My dad has had a lot of birth defects. And so I asked my family about the family history. Is there something that I don't know about? So, in the middle of a high risk pregnancy, I'm also trying to rule out what's causing blood pressure issues. And I still don't have answers, but it's very interesting to me that as I walked through pregnancy, not only did I have the obsessive, traumas from previous, but I was finding myself being very angry at other people for all of a sudden caring about me. So they didn't care, it didn't feel like they cared about me the last two times that
yeah,
I was, hunched over and bleeding out. But once I had an actual baby sticking, they're like, "Oh yeah, we want to be a part of your life now."
mhm.
And I was angry. I was very, and I didn't like myself angry. And so I really had to do some soul searching on that too, because I was like, I don't want to be angry at people, but I'm angry.
And
And
that
it was not hormonal. And that made me angrier if somebody said, oh, it's just hormonal. I'm like, no, I'm genuinely angry.
I love that too. It's your hormones. But, and it's so true because people don't know what to say. Like, you don't know how to
Yeah.
walk up to somebody and say, "I'm sorry you had a miscarriage." Is that etiquetely okay to do? Um, so people just kind of walk away and they're like, "We can't have the conversation." And then when you are pregnant, that's when they'll bring it up and go, "Oh, well, at least you got pregnant now," and all this type of stuff. They don't realize though the literally the PTSD that comes with it because you've lost the first two or first three, then you're a paranoid person with this pregnancy, right? You're constantly checking, you're constantly doing everything. um it's interesting about the anger too because here you are inviting life in, but you're also
Yeah.
grieving life that didn't happen. So I'm really curious about the photography and art, like with
Yeah.
these miscarriages, did you find comfort and solace in that, and what did you kind of create and do with it?
Yeah. So, and like I said, because I was already creating at these conferences, I have work that I can look at
Mm,
that I know where I was at that time. But I also, after the fact, I sat with a couple of people and I said, I have this idea. And I said, it's going to be gross, but would you be willing to, like, create with me? And I'll tell you, this is a funny and morbid story. So sorry, not sorry, y'all, but it was beneficial to me to have you remember how I was just saying how painful it was and how the blood was just everywhere. And I wanted to have something that looked like that.
mhm,
And so I bought this cheap vampire blood and I called up my friend in Chicago and we went to the lake. Okay. We went to the lake and I had this vision of her floating partially submerged in the water on a pillow
mhm,
with her head on a pillow with, her gripping her abdomen
mhm.
with blood just kind of spilling out all over the dress and all over, all down her body.
Yeah,
Um, because I believe that second miscarriage was the messiest for me. And I think at that time I was creating out of that
yeah,
need to express a visual of how it felt and how it looked.
yes.
Um, and what was weird was, y'all, this is like morbidly weird and in some ways wonderful.
Safe space.
This is a lake. This is a lake in Chicago. Okay, so I don't know who put the trash in the lake, but there was feminine products floating towards us the whole time we were in the lake doing this photo shoot. Now, I cannot tell you how morbidly interesting that was to me, and I wasn't necessarily shooing it away, but I was like, this is probably not the cleanest. But I was like, why are there feminine products floating towards us while we're doing this photo shoot? It was just too real, y'all, too real. And the friend that was doing it with me, she said that she had gone through a couple of things similar.
Mhm.
Um, and she says, in a way, it also helped her heal while we were doing that. So I thought that was interesting that something I'd set up for myself to heal
Yeah.
actually was helping somebody else as well.
Yeah.
So as an artist, I think we're always looking to connect with others. And that's kind of like one way that I know that we can connect with each other. We
Mhm.
can also connect with ourselves with art. So, and as this society has changed so much and we're all verbally processing a lot more and we're all talking about feelings more, which I think is great, um, we're all starting to share our stories more. And I think that's important. I think it's important to let people see who you are and what you've been through, because some of us we put on the, oh, I'm fine, I've been doing just fine. Yeah, I went through some stuff. Well, sometimes people need to hear your stuff. They want to relate to you a little bit better. Take yourself down a notch and get relatable to people. And that's kind of how I feel like what I've done with my art is just continuing to be relatable. And yesterday when I posted on this group that I said, hey everybody, some of y'all probably don't remember me, but I was at this convention 2 years in a row and had medical emergencies. And then I had the baby the third year. And by the fourth year, I was back to celebrate the fact that I had a baby.
Yeah.
So everybody saw the loss and the gain at the same time. And I was creating art through all of it. And so I thought it was important to kind of like visit that this week because my baby's about to be 7. So I'm celebrating the process that it took to have her and have her in our lives and the fact that she's still alive with us.
Exactly.
Just a
Well,
celebration moment of how far we've come and how much art I've made, through all this. And then of course after I had Miracle, I got pregnant in 2022, or right before 2020. And I lost that one too. And that was like a completely different headspace as well. Like I'd been through this before, but this one was different yet again. It was weird.
mhm.
And I just wanted to be oddly at a photo convention creating art. And all I was doing was locking myself in the bedroom with a 3-year-old running around the house. And I felt so much guilt and so much shame just sitting there bleeding out while everybody else was in the house. It was so weird.
I
And
take you back though to the lake and
yeah.
the picture because um in my practice, in my grief coaching practice, and all my years in grief and trauma, one of my biggest things I love to do with people is give your grief a visual.
Hmm.
So I've seen some pretty crazy stuff that people
Yeah.
go, holy smokes, what do you want me to do? That's exactly what you did. And the, you know, it's actually beautiful because that's what you saw in your mind and you were able to put that into a picture and go, that's what I felt. Down here at Shaw Festival, I've been to the theater and halfway through a play we were watching, I had brought my daughter. Well, they enact a miscarriage and I was not prepared for this. I did not realize this was part of the play. And my 9-year-old looks at me and says, oh, she lost the baby. And I thought, wow, you got that. And nobody said it. And so being able to go into the lake, and I think it's divine intervention, whatever it might
Oh,
be,
of course.
there's floating around that's suitable for it.
That was so wonderfully creepy. I love it.
It's so creepy, but it's also so telling. And, being able, I think the audience that are listening to this, being able to say, wow, they're just having a candid conversation about this. And that's how they experienced it, right? Being able to, and the other thing that kind of came to mind was I work with a lot of nurses and doctors. And I don't know if you've ever seen the emergency room after someone has died in it. And
Mm-mm.
people have taken photos of that. And I had a good friend who posted it and said, "This is what it looks like after an emergency." Ooh, for me, that was a lot to take in, but I thought, that's real. Good for you. Like, that is what it looks like. There's blood everywhere, there's a mess everywhere. This is real. But to a lot of other people, no, 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 no. So, just having these conversations and saying it's okay to put your grief into real time. It's okay to give it life in a sense and show us what it was like, because our words don't seem to articulate it. It's really
No.
hard to articulate how much pain and sorrow you're feeling. Um, Absolutely love that you named her Miracle.
Yeah.
That's a
And
good.
I told them she could always go by Mira if she wants a nickname and she thinks Miracle's too formal or whatever. But and it was just kind of funny because like I was telling y'all, the third miscarriage, we were getting family portraits done, which
Mm,
is so ironic because I was literally finishing up bleeding while doing this photo session.
mhm,
And I was like, what is the deal with photography and me and pregnancy and family and all this stuff? But the thing about it is that, I'd hired the photographer and we had this whole experience, but she's been through that kind of stuff too. So she understands loss, she understands grief, she understands personal stories, she understands hard things. And I think that's what was great about if anybody you're working with that's a photographer and you're trusting them with your life story, it's nice to work with people, myself included. I want to hear their story and I want to capture who they are and where they are in their life. And so at that, we have the photos on the wall so we can keep looking at them like this is the moment where mommy was saying goodbye to getting pregnant ever again.
mm,
And then we're celebrating at that time that our little 3-year-old who at that time started to look like a person. They go from baby, toddler, and they're like, wait, now I'm starting to see my child actually formulate into a person. It was the first time I saw her and I was like, wow, she looks so grown up. Like I see her. I
yes,
see she's not just my baby. I see her.
yes. That whole thing is a grieving process. I had my last podcast, we talked about grieving menopause. I was like, "Yeah, you can't make any more babies." And I'm like,
It is. Pandemic, I was grieving my business
yeah,
and I was grieving a baby
yeah,
and I was grieving we're moving on. It's like, wow, that's a lot of grief in a lot of short amount of time.
and adjust
Um,
and
but
accepting.
the best things that came out of moving on is truly when I got to start Weirdo Weddings because it's in line with my passion.
Mhm,
So out of all of the grief that I could line them up in a row and say, out of all of the grief I've experienced, it's led me to the greatest places of my life.
yeah,
And so now I'm facing this stuff instead of ignoring it.
mhm,
So it's like as soon as I tried to start a family, I was facing things I'd never faced before. And that's including the big giants that feel like they're overtaking you and the feelings and the uncertainties and insecurities, everything, facing everything. It
yeah,
was great.
and
I mean,
that's
it's hard, but it's great.
I can so relate because even starting Grief Uprooted, um, working in the industry for years, and then I just finally said, "Yeah, I'm at an age, no more baby making. I have the time. I just want to go head on. I want to hear
Yeah.
people's stories, and I want people to be real." And it's been one heck of a fun ride, and it's still going. So, if we were to help some of our listeners, if it was like, first off, I guess one of the things we should talk about is it okay to take the picture? Is it okay if you have a stillbirth? Or obviously, it's okay to recreate and use art in. I know I've done a lot of pictures with pastels and things like that of my own grief, or even working with other people and carrying that vicarious grief. I like to share and do it in art. That's my whole practice. I use a pinwheel of emotions, I use Play Doh, all this stuff
Aw.
to kind of help people through grief. But I know one of the biggest questions, even in COVID, one of the biggest questions was, is it okay to Zoom or use my phone when I'm at a funeral? Obviously, it was at the time. but came mainly from children because they didn't know the etiquette of this. So I think, for myself, taking a photo, I have a picture of my brother when he died when he was 19. I was 14. I brought
Yeah.
the camera in. I took a whole lot of pictures. I also put a whole lot of stuff in that casket to go, with him. I was a very expressive child, but I think it's okay to take those photos at a funeral. I think it's something that children can look back on. I do think it helps with the grieving process too. Like you were saying, if I had that little picture of a bean, I would be able to go into my mind and say, this was real, this happened. And it just makes it concrete. But I'm wondering, like, yeah, like what's the best way, I guess, because I guarantee a majority of people at a funeral are pulling out the camera and doing it, conspicuously.
What's interesting, yeah, okay. So what's interesting is my grandma and grandpa, I'm just going to use them as an example. They
Yeah.
both had different memorial services.
Hmm.
So grandma is in ashes in a tiny box,
Hmm.
and grandpa was in a full dress casket parade of whatever he was involved in, and so he had all of his little things on.
Hmm.
Um, Now this is for me though. Like I feel like once they are gone, they are gone.
Hmm.
I personally don't need a photo at a funeral to
Hmm.
move forward. What I do to move forward is I capture them while they were alive. And
Hmm.
even if you have those last few minutes where you're holding their old and crippled hand, I'm talking about my grandparents, by the way.
Yep.
If if you have the chance to hold the hand of the person before they pass, or you spend those last moments with them, holding them or kissing them or whatever else, those are the photos that I really resonate with.
Hmm.
If it's a casket photo, I watched my father-in-law do this with his brother. They stood there with the I don't even know how to say. They stood there with him and did I don't want to call it a selfie, but it felt like a selfie.
Yep.
And I'm laughing because I don't know how to express this. Okay, I'm very expressive, and giggling can be. Please don't be offended about me giggling. This was a serious moment for the family.
Yeah.
He was, I believe, he was the youngest brother, so it was quite a shock.
Hmm.
But they wanted that photo, and I feel like it didn't bother them either way. I think they were perfectly happy to have that photo and move on.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when we do memorial pictures, we don't post pictures of them in their caskets. We post pictures of them as they were alive and smiling.
Very true. Very true.
And I think if you are going to take pictures at funerals, you can just keep that personal for you if you want to. Like, if that helps you, then absolutely. If that is something that truly helps you,
Hmm.
I'm all for it. I'm all for visual captures of all different kinds. For me, I definitely wanted the photos of the tiny beans.
Hmm.
But I also know that, depending on how long we live, we never know how long we're going to live. And I remember going to a funeral one time of a teenager that it was a really strange boat accident. And I
Hmm.
remember going to her funeral and watching how they tried to, she was a bad boat accident, and they had to, put her together for her funeral open casket.
Yeah.
So, but I still remember her face.
Yeah.
I still remember her face. I didn't even need a photo for her. I remember her face. I remember the friendship that we had with the family, and that's all I needed to move on from
Interesting.
that.
And I think
Yeah.
it depends on the relationship, and I want to say that
Yes. Yes,
everybody
it does.
that the laughter comes. A lot of the guests that I interview, we do end up laughing because it's a really hard subject to talk about, and that is just a natural emotion that it's evoked. It's much better than us sitting here bawling. You wouldn't even understand us if we started to talk because the topic is so sensitive. So I appreciate everybody being open and accepting about this and realizing it's our stories. But I found comfort because my parents had a photo album of my brother's casket in all different pictures. I don't know who took the pictures, and it might have been the funeral home, but I would sneak into the dining room in our home to look at the photos of my brother because they just brought comfort to me to go, that wasn't a dream, that was real. So
Yeah.
for me, as a sibling and a child, I
Mhm.
kept wondering if it was real because it seemed like he fell over Niagara Falls. So it was a shock, like it was a slap in the face. It wasn't a process of watching someone die.
Yeah,
So
it wasn't an 89-year-old.
like it was just like
Yeah.
whack, and you're like, that couldn't have been real, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
for me, those photos really worked. And I was happy to have them. But yeah, when we post or we do things, we do them with people who are alive. That makes sense because that's how we want to remember them. But I think it helped me in understanding that this was a real thing that happened to me. And now
yeah.
it being like 34 years out, now I understand that it really happened. But as a child, I was kind of like, hmm. Um,
And
but
that's no, you just made a good point. Where we are in our lives right now also matters on how we process death.
yes, very
And
much.
if you're processing this as a younger person versus now I'm in my 40s, right?
Hmm.
Like, and I feel like well, I'm guessing Uncle James was the last one to pass that we attended the funeral. So it was like the more life goes on for me, the less I think I need sometimes as far as memorabilia. But at the same time, I'm obsessively like a photographer, always obsessed about photos. I have both both worlds going on. It's very interesting. And another thing I was going to add, like I'm sure some of y'all have seen, like even in the older days, where like I don't know, 1700, 1800s, they would take pictures of people
Yeah,
in their,
yeah,
past state.
because they died in the home. And
Yeah. So it
again,
was very interesting to see life and death in photos.
yeah,
Life and death.
and that was in the olden days, and often some of the things I see now that we're encountering that they never encountered was that person would die in your home. So
Yeah.
nobody would know if you're taking a photo, and you would be with them. And
Or
this,
they would pose them. Have you seen like the children, the little children, they would pose them almost like a doll when
yeah,
they passed. And it
and
was just very fascinating.
yeah, and they took photos of that. And so
Yeah.
now it's interesting because sometimes you'll say it and people will be like, "Ugh," other people will be, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of opinions. Love to hear them all if you're for pictures or not for pictures. But now I'm really curious about stillbirth because I know this is very much a practice at hospitals. Um,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people do that if a baby is born stillbirth, the book that I mentioned, the most important picture, it actually taught you how to set the child, the lighting, everything you needed to be
Yeah.
able to take the photo. Because now this was back in 2000, there was no photographer that was going to do this. So now we have photographers that would do that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that, that's things that there's even organizations that have photographers
Yeah.
that do this, and you donated your time and stuff like that to do this. So, if you had a stillbirth and you wanted to take a photo, I think the first part would be really hard getting over the ability to do that. But I know a lot of people will dress them and take a picture with the mom and with the
Yep.
dad. And
Yep.
um, is there any tips on how to go about doing that, or is that just something you're just going to do like you're taking a normal picture, I guess?
I would think that depending on where you are in if you're the parents doing this and you're just doing it on your own kind of a thing, I would just do as much as you're comfortable.
Mhm.
Quite honestly, when you're having a baby, even if the baby is not there, you have these cute clothes you've been holding on to. You've probably had something made with their name even. You've probably even named them.
Okay.
A lot of the common photos that I see a lot of parents do is the hands and the feet if possible, like getting these adorable or putting your wedding rings if
Yeah.
if you have wedding rings or any kind of memorabilia with the baby too. um those are some of the most precious pictures that I've seen over the course of volunteering.
Yeah.
Just I was just volunteering on the editing side, so I saw stuff. I didn't always get to be present, but when you're present in that moment trying to do these photos, do it in a very respectful way and
Hmm.
honor the little life. Use the things that mean the most to you that you want even hanging in a picture frame,
Yeah.
because a lot of people will either do like a picture book, picture frame, put their birth date on it,
Yeah.
use, little booties if you want to. I mean, there's so many cute little baby things that you probably had planned for your child, that it doesn't matter when they were born or how long they lived.
Mm-hmm.
You can capture that. I had recently watched a family go through something that the baby didn't live but several months, but they had the best several months with the baby in photographs and up until the point. So, but I've also seen babies that, what some of the editing jobs that I did was severe trauma to the skin.
Mm-hmm.
So just be mindful that if you can't do the editing yourself, reach out to some photographers or some bereavement photographers that can help clean that up just a little bit. Not to take away, but to make it a little bit more. For me, it's painful to see somebody in pain,
Yeah.
even if they're already passed. Like, to see a trauma or a wound or something like that, I don't think I could grieve properly.
Mm-hmm.
But if there are ways to get around it, if you don't, if that visually bothers you and doesn't help you process, then I would find a way to either cover with a blanket or have an editing service fix that. Because I did that for a family, and they could not have been more super happy, because I think all they did was get a couple of photos from the person who came in
Yeah.
to work that. But they were just like, can we like work on this and work on this, and then of course turn everything to monochromatic and black and white. It's sometimes their skin color is sometimes disturbing to the people that want to grieve as well. So just know that there's a way to grieve without having to look at everything that feels traumatic from the experience, but you can turn it into a work of art with the right photographer and with the right team.
Today's episode of Grief Uprooted is sponsored by Roberts Press, Canada's Grief Resource Centre. We are proud to have Roberts Press as a sponsor. They were established in 2000 and they carry over 500 different grief resources, not just books. They carry empathy crying teddy bears, they carry ceramics, memory boxes, and so much more. If you're involved or work at a hospice, hospital, funeral home, or a corporation, or your community is in need of grief resources, reach out to Roberts Press. One of the representatives will work alongside you in developing a grief resource library or finding that special resource to help your community heal. Visit them on the web at robertspress.ca.
Yeah, I love your idea of like the feet, the hands, the babies, like sentimental things that are there, like even the name, the wristband that they get in the
Yeah, I mean, even an ear. I mean, can you imagine, like I said, I was happy with a dot on a piece of
yeah,
paper.
yeah,
But can you imagine, like, you wanting to remember your baby and what how y'all came together, and you want to see the genetics regardless. And I think about ears, hands, smile, mouth, all this other fun stuff that we get to see when our babies, are born regardless. Those
yeah.
are the things that I know I would look for as a mom or a parent, is those little details, and
And
celebrate those little details.
sharing that when there's often other siblings, and
Yeah.
if this child died much earlier, then those siblings know that that baby existed.
And
And
that's another thing too. Like, my daughter's not really gonna have anything. I
mhm,
don't have anything to show my daughter. So it's like, well, mommy was pregnant 3 times besides you,
yeah,
but I don't have anything to show her. And so that for me could have been helpful. I'll have to find a way to show her without showing her. But she's still so young, and she doesn't grasp the concept of like, oh, well, where's my brothers and sisters? And I was like, well, they're all up in heaven right now. So nothing
yeah,
I can
three
do about it.
angels.
Yeah,
You're
they're
well
just
looked
little angels
over.
right now.
Yeah,
So,
I got three angels and one special miracle. That's beautiful.
and I tell you, like, because I didn't have photos made, I just went and got tattoos, to be honest. I went and got
Well,
tattoos.
very, very common, very common. I have a tattoo on my back, and I had really an angel, and in the wings, I put all the initials of people
Aw.
who helped me while I aided in world tragedies, and it just turned out all the initials were the same, so they're hidden in the wings. And I think tattoos, like that, is another great way to remember this and really to honor your body. I think that's the part that women who deal with miscarriage and stillbirth you need to honor your body. Your body is doing the best it can do. And we get angry at the physical body. Like,
Yeah, I was
I
gonna
really,
say, watch the anger, face the anger part of that comes out because of the situation, and because I was so mad at my body, even though I was pregnant and I
yeah,
was like having high blood pressure and gestational diabetes, I was ticked off.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, but deal with it, face your anger.
And I think that just using whatever art you can, we're lucky today
Whatever
to
you can
have
do.
our phone that we can take photos. And sometimes those photos aren't pleasant to take, but when you need to continue on that grieving process, sometimes we get stuck in denial. And when we're stuck in emotional denial, it is really hard to get yourself out. So, being able to look at that picture and go, oh, wow, this really did happen. Um, that
Yeah.
really sometimes can help you through all those different, I hate calling them stages, but all those different emotions that we experience when we're grieving. Um,
It's layers because you think maybe you've gotten over it, and then all of a sudden you start talking about it, and then you're crying again.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and I mean, that's what the reason why I'm doing more of these podcasts is because it's important to talk about it. Whether I cry or not, it still happened. It happened.
Yep. And that's
Right.
exactly it. And I think because society doesn't acknowledge it, and people are nervous to acknowledge it, you tend to go, did it really happen? And I
Yeah,
shame.
or it didn't matter. That's usually where we get caught. It didn't matter because there's no baby.
Yeah.
I beg to differ on that. It mattered.
Yes.
It happened to you,
Yeah.
and it's up to you to acknowledge what happened. In every Some people are better at moving on than others. Some people are very deeply, again, that's why I like the name of your podcast, Uprooted, because I feel like some hold on to their roots a lot deeper than others. And so some people can move on like no big deal, it's not a big deal. Some of us, we have layers we go through, lots of layers
Mhm.
of the losses.
Yeah.
And especially like I told y'all, like in 2020, when I had like 3 in 1, I was like, okay, let me just grieve all of them. What am I gonna do with my life? I don't know what to do. Like, I'm trying to potty train my kid and run my business because I can't go see people. And talk about just like triple grief that year. But I had nowhere else to go but to face it because you can't hide from it.
Yeah, and I think that's the misconception that people have is like, we can just avoid this. We'll just push grief over here. And it's integrated. It's so integrated into who you are. And it's always there in every stage of your life. You will revisit this. When you are an elderly person in a chair and your daughter is having children, you will go, she would have had siblings, but I had three miscarriages, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
never going to leave. It's always going to be there.
And I love that you just said that too, because it reminded me of a drawing that my daughter brought home of her standing there with two little babies in high chairs. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I just melted a little bit.
Exactly. You're like,
Because I
oh,
was thinking to myself, okay, like all the work that I did to start a family, and you feel like a failure, like I've messed everything up, and I just have one kid, and she comes home. I was like, oh my gosh, like if she is half the person I think she's gonna be, and I'm not even thinking about grandkids, y'all, like, but that just really touched my heart that she drew that. And I was like, that's adorable. I don't have no idea what to take with this, but it made me joyful for her. Whatever life brings her and whatever she walks through, I know that there's going to be joy involved.
and she's in tune, right? Her intuition, and she's in tune, and she's understanding.
Yeah, I was like, I mean, I know she's young, but she talks a lot about stuff and she'll draw a lot of stuff. And I'm like, tell me about what you're drawing. So
Awesome.
she's already expressive, which I very much encourage that, because if we can't teach our kids how to express themselves in healthy ways too, right? Like, let's sit down and draw a picture of what's going on,
Well, and
you
it's
know, what
that circle I've always said in our school system, it's a beef of mine, is that we teach them how to make babies, but we don't teach them what to do when they die. And your experience is exactly what I'm talking about. Majority of
yeah.
teenage girls miscarry. So they are taught how to have sex, put a condom on a banana and take birth control pills. But what happens when they get pregnant? They're not taught that part. And, even if they have that miscarriage or they choose adoption or whatever their choice is, they're going to grieve, because even if they choose to have the baby, we're going to grieve our teenage years. And nobody teaches us this. And it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
just complete the circle. Like, just let them know that if you do get pregnant, there's quite a high chance you'll have a miscarriage, or these are the things that'll be altered in your life, and you will be grieving certain things. You will also be brought joy when you realize the capabilities of your body as a woman. And if you choose to be that parent, but everything has changed, everything. And I just
Yeah.
wish they would step into that realm to say, this might happen. I think that would be the best birth control ever. People would start to
Yeah.
really rethink this, but we don't get real with them. We don't. We just teach
No,
them.
I realize that there's just everybody processes information differently too. So what I went through won't be what somebody else went through. But there are like certain things about our bodies that were like, why didn't y'all tell me about night sweats? That would have been helpful.
Exactly.
Nobody mentioned night
Yeah.
sweats. They mentioned everything else, and I thought I was gonna die. I was like, because like you build up all this information, you've read some books, you listen to your doctor every once in a while, and
Yeah.
you're like, am I having an infection or I'm this and that? When like a lot of people, they don't even think about that kind of stuff. They're like, well, I'm fine. And I'm over here sweating, like, what's going on?
That's when you hit menopause, because that's me. I'm like, oh, I'm hot. I'm hot. I can put my hair up. Then I'm cold, and it's like it's
And
only
I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of people are starting to talk about that now, which I'm very grateful for because that's a whole other level of,
yes.
womanhood. I'll call it that because it's I'm getting up there, and I have no idea what to expect. But a lot of people are talking about it now,
Yeah.
and so I'm very grateful for that because I want it in the radar for when stuff starts happening to me. They'll be like, oh, maybe that's what that is, or maybe that is what that is.
Yeah.
Because we have the ability to be our own little, I call it the objective detective, what's going on in our body. Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know,
Yeah.
but we can always go try to find out.
Exactly. And I think it's only through unity that we're capable of doing this. I think
Yes,
it's
community and unity.
yes, coming together and talking about it, especially as women, and men, like, we're all grieving. And but to answer the question, I do
Yeah.
believe the most important picture is the picture that you need, you want, and you're comfortable with taking. Uh,
Yes.
I think that is what's the most important picture. Just from chatting with you and having this conversation and being so open and candid, and I really appreciate that. I really didn't know where our conversation was going to go, because I know the topic is so like, I'm like, whoa, how do we talk about
It's a heavy one,
it? It's a
but
heavy
it's
one.
necessary. It is so
It
necessary.
it really is, and that picture, whatever it may be, is important to the individual. So I really think it's a personal thing, but everybody needs the most important picture. I think we all need that in our lives. So I just want to say, Jen, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being so open and so candid. And thank you to my audience. But do let us know, like, are you for taking a picture or not taking a picture? Love to hear your thoughts, your comments. And thank you for coming on, Jen. It is only together that we will heal. We will grieve together, and then we will heal together. Until next time, take care, everybody, and thanks for stopping in. Bye.
Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.